Hello, my name is Lewis and welcome to day 8 of Decktober. Today we're looking at Old Stickfingers. This Golgari horror says that when you cast it, reveal cards from top of your library until you reveal X creature cards. Put all creatures revealed this way into the graveyard and the rest on the bottom of your library. And its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures in your graveyard. This deck is all about milling to the max, getting those creatures into the graveyard, but also finding ways to bring them back to maximise their value. Now, let's get straight into the $40 budget deck tech. Starting off, as always, we have the ramp in this budget brew. Starting off here with Cultivate and Rampant Growth to fetch us out some basic lands and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Next is Dark Ritual to add 3 swamp to our mana pool, and Songs of the Damned to add a swamp for each creature you've got in your graveyard. That could be a lot. We've added in our trusty Arcane Signet to add either Golgari, and Golgari Signet to add black and green. We've got Krosan Restorer to untap target land, untapping a massive 3 if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, and Sakura Tribe Elder to sacrifice and get a basic land onto the battlefield tapped. There is Talisman of Resurgence to add a generic mana, or either Golgari at the price of 1 life, and finally, we have Sol Ring, because Sol Ring. Before we take a trip to Mill City, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for all things MTG. It's completely free to do, and it helps the channel grow and grow as we head towards 2,000 subscribers. As we just said, now we're taking a trip to Mill City as this deck is packed full of those mill-loving cards. First up, we've got some milling and ramp hybrids in Satyr Wayfinder, the ETBs, and you reveal the top 4 cards of your library, putting a land into your hand and the rest into your graveyard, and Skull Prophet to add a swamp or forest, or tap to put the top 2 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. There is Glow Spore Shaman, the ETBs, and you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, and you may put a land from your graveyard on top of your library. And there is Splinterfright, an elemental with trample whose power and toughness are equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard, and at the beginning of your upkeep you mill 2. For some huge mill, we have Deadbridge Chant, the ETBs, and says you put the top 10 cards of your library into your graveyard, and at the beginning of your upkeep you choose a card at random, and if it's a creature you pop it straight onto the battlefield, and if it's not a creature, that card goes straight into your hand. And there is Gravebreaker Lamia, a lifelink snake that ETBs, and you search your library for a card, put it into your graveyard and shuffle your library. And any spells you cast from the graveyard cost 1 less to cast. We've added in an Acolyte of Affliction to ETB, mill your 2 cards, and then bring a card back from the graveyard to your hand. A Mind Rack Harpy that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, each player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. There is Nyx Weaver to mill your 2 at the beginning of your upkeep with that sacking recursion option, an Auric Lore Mage to tap, search your library for a card, put it into your graveyard, and if it wasn't instant or sorcery, Auric gets a 1/1 counter on it. We've got Sir Conrad the Grim that we can pay to have each player put the top card of their library into their graveyard, with Conrad also doing 1 damage to each opponent. When another creature dies, a creature is put into the graveyard from anywhere other than the field, or if a creature card leaves the graveyard. We also have Commune with the Gods to reveal the top 5 cards of your library, putting a creature or enchantment into your hand and placing the rest into your graveyard. We have Jared's Orders to search your library for 2 creature cards, revealing them and putting 1 in your hand and the other in your graveyard. And Mulch to reveal the top 4 cards of your library, placing all lands revealed this way into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. There is Relentless Pursuit to reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put a creature and or land into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. And Grisly Salvage to reveal the top 5 cards of your library, again choosing a creature and or land to go into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Finally, we had the Binding of the Titans to make each player put the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard, and finally there is Incarnation Technique to mill 5 cards and return a creature card from the graveyard to the battlefield. Although we want creatures in the graveyard to boost up old Stickfingers, we want plenty of ways to reanimate these creatures from the graveyard, as we have many cards that will really benefit from creatures coming back into play. Now, why don't we take a look at some of these cards? So now we're looking at all of the reanimate loving cards in this deck. First up is Hatchery Spider that says when you cast this spell, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. You can put a green permanent with mana value X or less onto the field. Whilst not directly reanimating from the graveyard, this card can use those creatures to hopefully get you something great onto the field. There is also Golgari Grave Troll with that lovely dredge ability to mill 6 on your draw step and bring it back into play. Sticking with the big graveyard creatures, we've got Hogark, Arisen Necropolis, a huge 7/7 trample that we can cast out from our graveyard and convoke and delve to pay him to get him onto the field. and Stinkweed Imp that whenever deals combat damage to a creature, you may destroy that creature. Again, with that lovely Dredge 5 mechanic. We've got some army makers now with Tormod the Desecrator that says when one or more cards leave the graveyard, create a tapped 2/2 zombie creature token, and Triplicate Titan that when dies you create 3 3/3 golems with flying, vigilance and trample. If you have those upcoming recursion options going on, then bringing this card back is an absolute no-brainer. There is Willowgeist that says whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, put a 1/1 counter on it, and when it dies, you gain life equal to Willowgeist's power. With us also popping in a Beacon of Unrest to put target artifact or creature from the graveyard to the field under your control. Then, shuffling Beacon of Unrest into your library. We've added in a Dread Return to return target creature from the graveyard to the battlefield with that added flashback ability, and Forever Young to put any number of target creature cards from your graveyard on top of your library, whilst also drawing a card. Cards like this are unreal with Old Stickfingers, as you can stack as many creatures on top of your library before you cast Old Stickfingers to get a better chance of getting more creatures into the graveyard, and then having those other cards that benefit them from hitting the graveyard trigger again and then get you closer to the victory. We've got Living Death that says each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures they control, and then put all cards they exiled that way onto the battlefield. If you've been milling like crazy, then the amount of creatures and advantage you could be putting onto the field could be massive. And we've got Spider Spawning to create a 1/2 spider token with reach for each creature card in your graveyard, with that devilish flashback option. There is Stitch Together to return target creature from your graveyard to your hand, with the Threshold option to put it straight onto the field if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard. And Victimize to choose 2 creatures from your graveyard, sack a creature, and then you can bring the 2 chosen cards back onto the field tapped. There is Foot Bottom Feast to put any number of target creatures from the graveyard to the top of your library, again also drawing a card, and Golgari Charm to regenerate each creature you control, with an added removal option in there too. Finally, we have Grave Purge to again put a load of target creatures from your graveyard on top of your library, and you guessed it, draw a card. Now we're looking at the removal and the best of the rest in this budget deck, starting off with some of the biggest hitters in the whole deck with Lurgoyf, whose power is equal to the number of creatures in all graveyards and its toughness equal to that number +1, and Necrogoyf, whose power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures in all graveyard. That also says at the beginning of that player's upkeep, that player draws a card. That is 2 huge graveyard loving creatures. Onto creatures we want to reanimate over and over again, we have Demon's Disciple that ETBs and each creature has to sack a creature or planeswalker, and Fleshbag Marauder that ETBs and makes each player sacrifice a creature. There is Merciless Executioner that ETBs and again makes each player sack a creature, and Plaguecrafter who ETBs and makes each player sack a creature or planeswalker, with those unable to do so discarding a card. We've thrown in a Wreck Sage to destroy target artifact or enchantment, and Shriekmaw to ETB and destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature. That you may also evoke onto the field. Cards like this are essential in Old Stickfingers, as the more times we can reanimate, the more we're clearing out our opponent's board, as well as our own board to boost Stickfingers and those other graveyard loving creatures. We have Feed the Swarm to destroy opponent's creature or enchantment, losing life equal to that permanent's mana value, and Beast Within to destroy target permanent and give that player a 3/3 green beast creature. We have Death Sprout to destroy target creature and fetch out a basic land, and Infernal Grasp to destroy target creature and lose 2 life. There is Putrefy to destroy target creature or artifact, and Binding the Old Gods to destroy opponent's target non-land permanent, and later give us some more ramp. We've also got Brawn that if it is in the graveyard and we control a forest, it gives all of our creatures trample, and is only 1000 died that when ETBs can give us a big 1/1 insect army, and we can sack creatures to gain life and draw a card. There is Kessick Cage Breakers that when attacks we create a 2/2 wolf token that's tapped and attacking for each creature card in our graveyard, and Night Howler that gives it an enchanted creature +X+X, where X is the number of creatures in all graveyards. And finally we have trusty Commander staple Greed, because you can never draw too many cards. Finally we're finishing this budget brew with all of those lands, with this Old Stickfingers deck having 13 Swamp and 12 Forest. We've also got trusty Commander staples Command Tower and Exotic Orchard to help fix our mana, and even more staples in Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse to sack and get us some basic lands. We have Golgari Rot Farm and Jungle Hollow to give us some Golgari tapping options, and Tainted Wood and Temple of Malady to do exactly the same. Finally, we've got Woodland Chasm for even more Golgari mana options, and Dakmor Salvage for another card that we can dredge. The milling party never stops. Old Stickfingers is a cool new option for Commander, especially if you're looking to take a trip to Mill City, and it's a Commander that's definitely more on the fun side rather than the competitive. Make sure to check into Decktober Day 9 tomorrow, where we'll be looking at a deck based entirely around one of the biggest tribes in all of MTG. There we have it, that is the $40 budget Old Stickfingers deck tech. Thanks for watching, and make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for all things MTG. Check out our link tree in the description below for all of our social media and affiliate links. But for now, I'm all tapped out, so I'll see you in the next video.